Continuous light is nice, but continuous light has a limitation, meaning I can't compete if it's bright, ugly sunlight with a bright continuous light. I can't separate them. Where with off-camera flash, I can always underexpose the bad light and fill it in with an off-camera flash.
Welcome to this week's episode of Photo Pros Weekly. I'm Brandon Heiss, and I'm joined again here with Olivia Tuttle. This week, we're going to dive deep with Bob Davis, a wedding and portrait photographer based out of Chicago, Illinois. And welcome, Bob. Thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here. So happy to be here. It's nice to virtually connect, although I wish it was in person. It was coming up in my Facebook feed that this time last year, we were all together in Vegas.
Yeah, the WPPI, right?
Yep.
Very good.
Kind of missed that coming together, you know. We're so social, and everything we do with events, weddings, portraits, all that thing depends on coming together. So I do see a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. We're getting tons of inquiries and things are opening up. So yeah, we're getting prepared for a busy year.
Well, that's good to hear. And I know, I think at one point we talked last year, kind of in the heart of when most weddings were getting canceled, and you had mentioned to me that you felt that 2021 was going to bring multiple weddings per week, and not just for you but for all wedding photographers. It seems
Sure.
like Saturday is a traditional wedding day, let's say, but people aren't going to have the luxury of choosing what day of the week they get married in this year, and if they decided to hold off or postpone their wedding from 2020. So is that still kind of looking the same this year, that wedding photographers are going to be shooting on Tuesday nights and or whenever they can?
I think so. People are ready to celebrate. And I talk to photographers because every state is different. So Illinois is still really slow opening up. But I know people in Florida and Texas that have already been doing full-on weddings. So folks are kind of done with COVID, done with being restricted. They want to start living their life, and with common sense. People are smart. I trust everybody's common sense. And people are looking to come together and celebrate life after this year we've been through. So I'm really training now. I really am. Physically, cardio's not the problem, but strength and, wrist and things like that, and nutrition, because Memorial Day weekend, I've got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, back to back to back.
All three different weddings then, huh?
Not a rehearsal, but a welcome dinner, 2 weddings, and then a post-wedding day. We're still waiting to hear about Monday celebration.
Wow.
But yeah, things are still kind of fluid. And we have a few people that in September and October are full on expecting 300-person weddings.
Wow. Well,
They're really diving in.
I hope we are at the point where we can have 300 people gathering and doing it safely and responsibly. So, well, good. So Bob, for those people that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us, I mentioned your kind of wedding portrait, but tell us and the listeners, who you are and when you got started in photography and kind of your history of photography.
I feel like I'm one of those old guys now, just telling war stories. I've been doing this my entire life. I've been a photographer since high school, hooked on photojournalism. My goal was to work for the Chicago Sun-Times, and I achieved that goal. I worked there for 15 years, freelanced all along the way because we could while I was at the paper. So I freelanced for Time, Newsweek, People, Sports Illustrated, all of that. So come 2004, I was getting burned out on bad news. For whatever reason, I'm good at it. People welcome me into their life when there's tragedy, and I've never turned down an assignment. But then once we had kids, I kind of said to our editors, like, okay, been there, done that. This is starting to really grind on my soul. And, I don't want to do any more dead people stories, no more dead kid stories. Otherwise, serious, I'll resign. And they're like, you're full of shit, seriously. Because whoever leaves the newspaper, nobody does,
Right.
Especially a newspaper that at that time was in the top 10 in the nation.
So you worked for the Times for 15 years then? And then what happened when you said you don't want to cover any of the nasty news anymore?
Yeah, I got burned out on bad news,
Yeah.
really. And in December of 2003, there was a bad nightclub incident in Chicago. The name of the nightclub was the E2. I'll never forget it. The club closed, and then they decided to have an after-hours party, and someone on the inside chained the doors shut, right? So there was still a lot of people inside. Fire breaks out, smoke alarms go off, people get trapped at the glass doors, trampled. So there was, I'm paraphrasing now because I don't remember, but there was like 6 or 7 people that died in this incident. I got sent to the scene the next morning. For whatever reason, I connected with a family member who was grieving, at a makeshift memorial site there. And they want to tell their story. And so you listen, and they're like telling you, well, I want to show you, what my son lost. And her son had died. It was a mom in this tragedy who had a son who was living with grandma. So I go back to the house with him, and of course the paper like, this is gold because it personalizes the whole story. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not going to push. And they call these things handouts. And the paper's like, well, get a handout of the dead guy, meaning get a photograph that we could run paper as a headshot that this is one of the victims. And again, try and personalize the story. So we do that, and people open up their lives. They invite me on this entire journey of grief with them, picking out the casket, allowing me in to the funeral. And one of the saddest photos that still gives me chills is Dad's open coffin, people are crying, and the little boy is looking up on the casket like this, right? And it's tearing my heart apart. I resigned that day. I went in,
Wow.
finished the assignment, finished the story. I said, I told you guys, there's younger people here, people that want to do this kind of stuff. I was going to quit. And so I did. Handed in my resignation. And it's a natural evolution to weddings. And also it was a convergence of technology that made it easier. Back in January 2004, digital was really becoming viable and not so challenging to work with, because I was working with digital with the paper back when we had a VCR pack that shot a 1 megapixel file on deadline, but it was really expensive and really laborious to get an image. And then when the Nikon D1 came out, that really kind of revolutionized it and made it mainstream and affordable for everybody to go digital in the news industry. So, I had that knowledge and went to that. And so I just evolved to the storytelling with weddings, and digital made that so much easier. The chief photographer who hired me, Bob Katalik, said, he's giving me my very first assignment at the Sun-Times, and it was to go photograph jockey Pat Day at a horse race track. He was kind of winding down in his career, one of the most winningest jockeys. He's like, kid, come back with a good picture, or don't come back at all. We can't publish an excuse. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my best. And you embrace that. And you're always on deadline. Back then, when I started at the Sun-Times in 1989, we had multiple editions. So you'd have a morning edition, you'd have a downtown circulation, 5 o'clock edition for people getting off of work, which would have the final markets in it. And then you'd have a home delivery edition. So you're always shooting for a deadline and edition. And with sports, you want to be relevant with the 10 o'clock news. So those 2 earlier editions, you want to have relevant photographs in that could compete with what's going to appear on the news. So we would literally, you'd shoot for the first 5 minutes of any quarter, be it basketball, hockey, or football, whatever, and you'd have to unload your film and send it, whatever you had, right? So you have to take these notes. And there were times when I first started, they were just ending this program. Bob Katalik, who hired me, loved the pigeons, homing pigeons. So they used to have little homing pigeons, and they'd have film runner, but they would put a little film canister on the pigeon and
That's how you would send it
them
out?
off. I only did it one time, right? And then the paper's like, look, we have people that could do that, but we also had film runners, and they're interesting characters. So a guy who worked in our press room was a Hell's Henchman, which is a chapter of the Hell's Angels. So they would run our film every quarter. There'd be 4 of us at the game, pick up our bag of film. Because they're on a motorcycle, they could navigate through the traffic really quickly. And the cops liked them. Boom. So we're constantly running film back and forth. There was a couple things going on with the pigeons. Is at that time, Catalic was nostalgic about it. And secondly, the city was reintroducing peregrine falcons. So that was another thing that kind of, had to remove the nostalgia from Catalic. And he's one of those old guys, shot 4x5. He photographed Marilyn Monroe and all those. He goes, hey, it works. Let's stick with it till
Yeah,
it doesn't.
sure.
And they're homing pigeons. So Mike Tyson is huge. He loves homing pigeons. It's still a pretty big hobby in New York, where people take their pigeons to different locations and then they time how long it takes them to get back to their destination.
Wow.
Last year, we still did a few events, and this is becoming progressively more expected for higher end clients. And they want to move images to social media immediately. So that's what I do is during the step and repeat, especially when they're greeting guests and celebrity type people, I'll photograph and it'll go right to the PR person's phone, a JPEG file, and they could send out immediately. So they'll stand right next to me on the step and repeat. I'm not even tagging photos. I'm just shooting and dumping to their phone because there's just not that much time.
Right.
And the last time we did a charity event, we moved 80 photos that way, which is relatively easy as long as you have a good connection. Going back to film days, that evolved. We would have to scan each negative. And it got to the point we were doing this from stadiums. Like the night the Bulls won the first championship in LA against the Lakers, we were developing film right at the stadium. And then we had this thing called a Compander, which was a Halliburton briefcase with a terrible scanner in it and a little TV screen in it. And it would take it like 10 minutes to scan 3 colors, red, green, blue. And if there was a hiccup in there anywhere, you'd have to scan all over again. Then you'd plug in the modem right to it and send it back to the paper. But that was better than even before that. We used to make prints. And then you'd put it on a drum scanner. And then that would take like 10 minutes per color to send the drum scans over the phone. We would bring a big trunk, which would be your portable darkroom. If AP wasn't there, if the Associated Press was there, sometimes we would contract for them and they would just develop our film, dip and
Yeah.
dunk, and then we would scan it and print it.
And now you just have a nice gear bag for all your lighting.
Yeah, that, and it's like right to the phone,
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me how
So
fast you
speaking
can
of gear
do that.
bags, what is like the one item that you have to have in your gear bag when you're shooting?
Well, I have to have light. I always have to have some type of off-camera flash. If I don't, dare I say, Dawn gets upset. Happy wife, happy life, and she's an amazing retoucher, designer. She does all of our final editing on our photographs. And just that kiss of light does make a huge difference in the photographs. In the Midwest and in the event space that we're in, I don't get to choose the right time of day for lighting. You got to go when people say go. So that's why you got to have some type of auxiliary lighting. I guess I do care what it is. For me, it's always been flash. Continuous light is nice, but continuous light has a limitation, meaning I can't compete if it's bright, ugly sunlight with a bright continuous light. I can't separate them. Where with off-camera flash, I can always underexpose the bad light and fill it in with an off-camera flash. And that has even gotten easier. But this started back in photojournalism, right? Everything goes back there because that's my roots and foundation. And we used to do a lot of press conferences in Chicago. The mayor would speak, the feds would speak. There's a full list of press conferences every day, and someone would cover them all because you never know what news would come out of those. Basically talking headshots. And they would have these press conferences anywhere and everywhere, but never light them, right? So you might, actually I started this with our first African-American mayor, Harold Washington. He was so dark complected and he'd be in City Hall in some alcove giving an impromptu press conference and it was dark and it was just terrible, right? Maybe a TV guy would have a direct spotlight every now and then. So what I started doing is, okay, I had two 283s, one 285 Vivitar speed light. They weren't speed lights, they were just flashes. So I would have one on an optical trigger on a little portable light stand off, and I would have my on-camera one in, and just adding that side light coming in, all of a sudden my editors are like, you're now the press conference guy. I'm trying to do something good, and because nobody else wants to light them, I get to do them. I said, well, how about I'll do the important press conferences. Photo essays to me were what I always wanted to do, tell people stories. And so the triangle of light evolved there. So then I started doing, a 30-foot PC sync cord, because then other photographers that had a flash on camera at these press conferences were firing my light, and then my light wasn't ready to go. So I needed it dedicated, right? So then I started doing 2 of them with sync cables, right? So the third light was always the on camera. The triangle really didn't evolve until radio poppers came along. So Canon and Nikon both came out with optical line of sight communication, which freed you from having an optical trigger that anybody could fire, or a long sync cable that people would trip over at events. But with wireless line of sight communication, at least I could get 2 lights in front of me. See, it's line of sight, so that's limiting. I couldn't have a backlight or a light that my on-camera flash could not communicate with. Radio Popper invented an interpreter which would capture that optical signal from Canon and Nikon, translate it into a radio signal, decode it instantaneously back to an optical signal on those speed lights. Whoa, revolution. Now I could put a light anywhere. I could go and really dig into backlighting, which I love. I'm a backlightaholic, because now I don't have to worry about my flash not seeing the transmitting light, right? That's when the triangle really took shape, because I could put these lights way out of sight so nobody sees them, right? They had an easily 250-foot range with the radio poppers. So now I can get these lights out of the space so they're not impeding anybody's sight lines or in harm's way. And then just the progression, Canon and Nikon said, wait a minute, we need to evolve this. And they came out with the radio signal and the speed lights. And then now strobes are doing it, like the FJ system. It's all wireless radio controlled with dedicated groups.
So, Bob, one of the things that I've seen you do, and I think is really unique, is the triangle of light. And it's something I don't know if you've coined or if you learned it from somebody, but I certainly see a lot of people doing it now. Tell us a little bit about your triangle of light and kind of how you use the triangle of light, maybe at weddings or ceremonies.
Well, I'd like to take credit for it. I know I invented the term, or coined the term, triangle of light, and we've been teaching it now for at least 10 years. Yeah, at least. It goes back to radio popper days, when they created this radio interpreter, which freed us from the constraints of line of sight or optical communication with speed lights. So now that we all have this radio capability of communicating with off-camera flash, we can put 3 lights in any venue space. So what the triangle of light is we put each light into its own independent group. Now there's a purpose at the way I approach it, because your on-camera flash is always in group A with Canon. If you're Nikon, at least Nikon labels it master, then groups A, B, C, D, and E. But Canon, they don't do a really good job clarifying in their instructions that group A is always the sender unit. And the FJ80 is now in that same lineup, meaning A is always your sender unit. So if we want to differentiate that flash output from any of our other groups, they all need to be in their own independent group. So the on-camera, if it's going to contribute, is in group A. Then my off-camera flashes will start with camera left will be in group B. Camera right in the front of the room will be in group C. And then my separation light is in group D, and that's always in the back of the room. So the way I set up our room is wherever the most of the entertainment or excitement is going to be, let's say the dance floor in front of the band, that's where the A and B light are pointing at the floor, at the dance floor. That's where the speeches are going to be, the cake cutting,
All the action,
the dancing, all the action, right? And I could even shoot towards those lights to get some cool bokeh, or to get some cool flare, whatever the case may be. But by having those in independent groups, it frees us up instead of just all three lights firing, which is a huge advantage going from just a bounce flash or one flash, but to now dial those lights in. Sometimes we don't need the B light to fire at all. Let's say dad is speaking and he's facing the head table across the dance floor, but he keeps favoring looking toward the bride, and she may be to my camera right. Well, I'm then going to use the C light to illuminate her face, right, from across the room. The D light is going to illuminate dad from the back of the room, and we don't need B light at all. Now, here's where the power of the ISO comes in. So the way I approach this is I find my ambient light exposure first, and I use my ISO. So we've got to handhold it. We're usually in a dark space, so my starting point is always 1600 in a room. And rarely do I go above f4, f4.5, because they're small lights, and we still want that ambient light to come in. So I stay at that 4 to 5 aperture range. And now I just use my shutter speed to dial in how much ambient light I need. The higher up the shutter speed goes, the more your off-camera flash is the dominant light. The lower your shutter speed is, the more you're dragging in the light that's in the room. But as long as we keep that 1 to 2 stop separation between ambient light and off-camera flash, we will minimize camera shake and blur. So if it's a really dark space and you're at 1200 ISO and you're at a quarter of a second, you could still stop the motion because the flash is the dominant light source, and that instantaneous pop of light will freeze everything.
And you always have the coverage, of the scene.
Exactly. And our goal is to just put that kiss of light in there so that we can capture in its best light and get those highlights in people's eyes. So the triangle of light, I just happen to have 3 of the Canon speed lights here because I have 3 of them. And here's the way we would do this, and I'll just illustrate it really quickly, and then I'll go through the diagram. And the globes, the spheres are key. They really are. And the globes are really important because the light without very linear, right? Follow me? So then it's very precise where that light is going to go, and the shadows it's going to create are going to be much harder. By putting a globe on, we spread the light to the side and we diffuse it going to the center. So let me get these out of the shot now, and then I'll go through the diagram. And this is where the radio signal and independent groups are crucial. And you could do this, I even did this recently with the FJ400s, because I have 3 of those at a virtual launch for a movie, and they had all these guests, and it was a Zoom meeting. But anyways, here, let's just go through this quickly. This is actually me right down here taking the photograph of the couple on their first dance. Here's one light. This is in group C. Here's another light. This is in group B. The third light is actually up in a technical loft. So this is where the spotlight would be in this old club, the Standard Club in Chicago, and that's in group D. Now, the reason they're always in B, C, and D is, one, I could remember that. I never have to guess what light is what to change its power, turn it up, turn it down, turn it on, turn it off, switch it from manual or TTL. But the on camera or the center unit is always with Canon in group A, right? And I believe it's the exact same way with the FJ80.
Yep.
So if this light is in group A and the on camera is in group A, we can't differentiate that power output. So that's why groups are so important. So once we set these lights up, so these 2 lights in the front are right by the speakers for the band. So they're out of the way. And I use the H2 Pro water bags to secure them, so we're doing everything we can. Should someone run into them, it's not going to fall over. The D group here is up in the technical loft, but if it was in the corner of the room in the back, I would use an H2 Pro bag on that as well. And I use those because I carry enough heavy weight to the scene that it's so much easier to bring these bags and fill them with water once we arrive. The next thing I do is I have to assess what is the ambient light in the scene. 99% of the time at wedding receptions, it's tungsten, or venues. The chandeliers are tungsten, all the candle lights are tungsten. So what I want to do is put a tungsten gel on each one of these lights so that my lights are just a kiss of light. I'm not trying to overpower the scene. Now, because this room is a really warm tone, meaning this is an entire mahogany wood floor, and the walls are kind of an ivory warm tone, the curtains are a warm tone, all the light bouncing around, I choose to shoot in Kelvin. So I like to go a little bit lower, like 3000 degrees Kelvin, because Canons shoot warmer. They lean toward the red side. So I just want to bring that color temperature down a little bit. I try and strive to get the image right in camera. Like we used to say, Brandon, I like to pre-touch it instead of retouch it. The more I could get it for Dawn to be dialed in, the happier she is. Now we could do anything with this triangle. And by the way, this photograph is from a remote camera, which was a 1DX with a 16-35 remotely fired via a pocket wizard from my camera. So every time I take a photograph here, it's firing this camera.
Gotcha.
And this comes from sports.
Yep.
So covering Michael Jordan, I used to use 2 remote cameras, one behind the backboard and one up in the second balcony with a 300 millimeter lens pointed right at the basket. And then I would be actively photographing with my camera. And every time I take a shot, it would fire the 2 other cameras. So here I have a remote camera up high, either in a technical loft or on a 12-foot light stand. And then usually at Jewish events, there's a wedding canopy, a huppah. So I put a remote camera up there as well, because I don't want to stand up under the wedding canopy and be a part of it. I want to capture that remotely.
Makes sense.
So these are using the 600 EXRTs because at this event, this predates the FJ system, right? But it works the exact same. I envision going to 200s because we have more oomph and a quicker recycle time. 200 watt seconds, 80 watt seconds, and then putting the globes on those and then using the FJ80 to communicate with them. This is obvious, we're gonna light it, right? It's a big dark venue, right? This one was 1250 ISO, so I rarely go above 2500 these days. There's no reason to. Here's another one. Here, let's turn this white so we can not be confused. So this is an atrium, sorry. So this is what we would call a micro wedding. Although I don't work any less, my day is just as hard. But there was, this was last June, and there were 50 guests. And they could have 50 guests because all of this opened up. So it became an outside space. Indoor was limited to 20, but because after the ceremony, they opened up the roof, they opened up these windows, it counted as an outdoor space. We have a lot of natural light coming in, but it's backlit and it's overhead. So if we didn't light this, for one, there wouldn't be this separation, and 2, everybody would have raccoon eyes, right? So it's still the triangle of light. B, C, D with the spheres. The sender unit is on camera A, but it's inactive, meaning it's just sending the instructions to the other lights. The main light here is D because it's lighting up the groom's face. But you see the highlights on the parents and on these guests, the C light. The B light was lowered -1, right? So it felt very congruent that we have the light coming in through the glass and flowing across. By separating it out, we could turn this light completely off, make one light the main. I was inspired to create the triangle of light from 3-point portrait lighting.
Sure.
So at any point in time, we can make one the main, one the fill, one a backlight, or a hair light. Here's just another example I like to share about using lights outside, right? Oftentimes, again, I have to photograph when people say go, and on this day, it's overcast. We have overcast clouds, and this is at a lily pond. And so there's no sparkle to the light. It's completely flat. When you have flat light, we don't have any reflections, right? But Lauren had this vision because she saw this photograph I took of one of her friends when there was nice sunlight in this space. And she's like, oh, I was envisioning the sunset like Dana's wedding or Dana's engagement session. I'm like, don't worry about it, I got you. So what I did is we had the FJ400, the long throw reflector, baby, across the pond, right? We put that in group A.
Mhm.
I was using my 1DX Mark II with the STE3 transmitter communicating to the FJ400 in Canon RT mode. And then I used another speed light off over here in the bushes just to give it that congruency that the light was passing through, right? Put a little bit of warmth in here. This was a full CTO gel on both of them, but I was in, I want to say like 6,500 degrees Kelvin manual, just to give it that warmth.
Mhm.
And by lighting the couple, boom, we get the reflection. And then we get the tonality in here that we don't have to dodge and burn and selectively, brighten and darken. And it made it a lot easier for Dawn to work with this file.
Absolutely. That's awesome, Bob. No, I think lighting for purpose, lighting with intention. A lot of people throw light up there just because they want to, somebody told them, "Hey, I need to use lighting," but lighting for purpose. And one of the things I like to do, is look for shadows kind of in the background and mimic those shadows with your lighting on the client because if you don't, then something's going to be off, and maybe the client wouldn't notice, but you as a photographer or your peers would certainly notice. Well, good stuff. No, that's I love seeing Bob's triangle of light, and I sometimes go to weddings myself and see other photographers
Yeah.
doing it.
So, of all of these places that you've shot, I mean, for weddings and such, is there one that's like most memorable, or I don't know if it was like the event that was most memorable or the location
Um,
or
it,
maybe the
so I'd
people?
have to, every event takes on the energy of the couple,
Hmm.
right? And it's reflective of them. But one of my favorite events ever was Eva Longoria's wedding to Tony Parker. It was a 6-day celebration in Paris. So it was always something new, something different, great energy from the people that were there, very warm and inviting to us. So we didn't feel like the help at all. And moments were just unfolding before us. And it's like I couldn't take a bad picture of the entire 6-day event. And it was just amazing. And that was back in line of sight days. So I could never get a D light, but I always had a B and C light.
Wow, Paris, 6 days,
Yeah. Can't go wrong with that.
celebrities.
No,
I'm
you
sure you
can't. I
saw
mean, we hung out
some
in
pretty
Coco
cool stuff.
Chanel's apartment. She was trying on dresses. The actual wedding, she got married twice because in Paris, you have to do a civil service and then you have to do your faith service. So they did a
Okay.
civil service and it was downtown Paris and it was like half the city was in on it at
Wow,
a chateau. And then their actual wedding, they got married in a big cathedral because she's Catholic, he's Catholic. And then the celebration was at a chateau that had gardens that rivaled Versailles.
Okay.
It
Wow.
wasn't a really big wedding. It was only about 180 guests, but it
Well,
was
I
just
don't
the
think it
energy
needs
of
to
all the
be
people.
huge as long as you're in Paris, right? I mean, that's
Exactly.
pretty big.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's pretty
Yeah.
extravagant. And the 6 days is a
But just
little bit.
everybody's energy was flowing and having fun. And it wasn't that they were celebrities, it was just the energy of the people.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it was like a two wedding event in the 6 days.
Sure. So we had a welcome dinner on the Seine River. We did Euro Disney, and she took all her guests to this. So it's kind of cool. They closed Euro Disney for them and their group. So it was athletes and actors. And then we did a welcome dinner at Baccarat, in the House of Baccarat. Then they did a casino night. Then we did the civil ceremony. And then we did the religious ceremony and celebration, the big
Wow.
wedding.
Just a modest wedding.
Just a modest wedding.
Sounds like a normal.
It was
you know,
fun. And you're rolling the entire time. And that's, again, one of those things where it was pre being able to send the files from the camera. So poor Dawn was locked in the tower of this chateau on wedding day, and we're feeding her cards because it got published in Touch magazine that Tuesday, and the wedding was on Saturday. So, we're editing photos at 5 in the morning on Sunday morning, and Eva Longoria is picking out her favorite ones, and we
To
had to
send
send them
in.
250 photos back to New York to get them published.
Wow.
On the pigeon?
No pigeon for that one.
That's
We
awesome.
actually, they had their own editor and writer there, and we put it on 2 hard drives, and they took the hard drives and flew back to
Yeah.
New York.
Very
That's
cool.
amazing. Well, Bob, uh, we're kind of up against time here, but God, I feel like we could go on forever, and we're going to have you back because we haven't even dug into, some of the time you had with Oprah and Obama and some
Oh,
other
it's
past
fun.
presidents. It's you truly have seen, uh, you know, more than people can imagine seeing in a lifetime, and you're still only like what, 35 years old. I mean, you act
Right,
35.
right.
You've got your youth. And so I guess what I want to say is thank you first for joining us today. And where can people find you, Bob? Where can people see your work and find you on social media?
Well, you can find us. Dawn just put in a ton of time and effort into redesigning our website. So everything is Bob and Dawn Davis. So our website's bobanddawndavis.com, as well as our Instagram and Facebook. Now, if you're looking for creative stuff for photographers, a photographer's audience, then mine is Bob and Dawn in the wild, because that's kind of a catch-all of everything and tutorials. And then I go live on Facebook. So just look up, I believe it's one Bob Davis on, or Bob Davis one on
And
Facebook.
you do like
But
lighting labs, right? You go,
I do lighting
yeah.
lab. Yep. I'm always testing gear, constantly practicing, constantly trying to tweak what we do so I could even be more efficient and faster. And before every event, we get together with our team and we practice, run through setup, breakdown. How are we going to light this? What's our approach for that? Again, with that philosophy that we don't want to turn someone's day into a photo shoot.
Well, and I'll leave it at this. I mean, that's truly what separates you as a professional. I mean, you practice. It's just like an athlete. You're practicing your craft, and then you're just preparing for game day, and your uh, life is the wedding day, and that's why you have a bunch of celebrities and happy clients in your portfolio. So.
Well, it goes back to Bob Katalik and what he said. You can't publish an excuse. You can't come back. So here, for people that are listening and watching, look up Sofia Vergara's wedding photos, right? And here's someone who's a high-level celebrity. She was a model. She could afford anybody. And they got the house photographer at the Breakers. She shot it with on-camera flash, and they're just terrible. The color is so orange, and my heart's going out to her. And that's what's challenging in what we do as wedding and event people, is in many respects we're dealing with uneducated buyers because it's all emotional. Now, if this was an ad for L'Oreal or something, some brand that she represents, there would be art directors, there would be photo editors, and they would clear all the skills needed to accomplish that photo. But when it comes to weddings, people just don't know, and things happen so fast that they're only going on the emotion of their friend and what they recommended. And going back to Katalik, he always said to me, sign your work with excellence. In the newspaper industry, you're only as good as your last photo that was published. And so I embrace that to this day. We're only as good as the last event we photographed, because that's what people see.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Cannot publish an excuse. It
Yeah.
should. That's not just in photography. That's life.
Yeah,
Don't quit
applies to
publishing
anything.
No,
excuses, people.
I hear photographers that come to us and say, "Oh, it was so dark."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Well, I've shared with you the triangle of light. You set it up. Nah, things were going so fast." I'm like,
Yeah.
"You could get in there 10 minutes ahead of time, pop your light
Practice.
stands up, and do it."
Yeah.
That's an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Well, great, Bob. Well, thank you so
Well,
much for
cool.
joining us. That concludes this week's Photo Pros Weekly. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe here, not only on YouTube, but also on whatever platform you're listening on today. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, Bob.
Bye-bye. Thank you.